Today we'll be talking with three genetic counselors who recently took the ABGC board exam to hear their advice on how to create a study plan. And I know that this is something that has been asked about a lot and that is on a lot of people's mind. And truly, it really is the first step in starting to study for this exam. So, very excited to be joined today by Emily, Janice, and Vedika. So, first thing we'll do is just ask everyone to introduce themselves. Sort of, Emily, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to speak with you all. So my name's Emily Hughes. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I recently graduated this May from the genetic counseling program from Long Island University in New York. I am now currently back in Pennsylvania. I am trying to find the right job fit for myself at this moment, but I'm also currently working on publishing my research that I did with Genetic Alliance, which I'm super excited about. And yeah, I'm really happy to say that I took the boards this August and was able to pass. And I know that building a study schedule was really important to me and was really pivotal in my study experience. And so I'm excited to share whatever I can with you.
So, thank you. Okay, Janice.
Hi, I'm Janice Davis-Ketchmore. I am from North Carolina. I graduated from the University of North Carolina in Greensboro in 2022. Same, I just recently took the exam this past August and passed as well. Right now, I am working in a cancer and adult genetic counseling setting, and I agree that creating a study plan was a really important part. It was very valuable for the continuation of passing the exam.
Great. Thank you. And Vedika.
Thank you for having me, and it's great speaking with you all. So my name is Vedika Ramesh. I'm originally from Naperville, Illinois, which is a suburb outside of Chicago, and I graduated from the University of Michigan's program this past May 2024. And right now I'm based in New Orleans. I work in the general genetic counseling team, and I primarily see a lot of the patients for cardiology and neurology indications. And yeah, I will say I was fortunate to have also been able to take boards this past August and passed, and definitely was very overwhelming in terms of figuring out where to start when I was studying for boards. So definitely happy to help share whatever I can just to help with preparing that study schedule.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for those introductions. And also have to say congratulations to all of you on passing. I first just wanted to start by asking, when did you first start to think about creating a study plan? Like how far in advance? And what were those initial days or weeks like for you? How did you sort of get started, that very first step? So maybe Emily, we can start with you.
Yeah, so definitely the first few weeks after graduation, and I wanted to give myself a little bit of time just to, enjoy my days, enjoy, seeing my family, friends, etc. And so I started really thinking about studying probably about 2 to 3 months out of the exam window. And how I went about it was I ended up accumulating all of my material that I had, throughout my graduate school program, lectures, clinical rotations. The Discord that StudyRare provided was absolutely instrumental. I went through the Discord, any resources that anyone had shared, and I kind of just accumulated them all. And then I sat down to make my study plan because for me, being on a very rigid study schedule is really important for my success. It's not important for everyone. It's just really about knowing yourself and what you need in order to be successful. And for me, that was a very strict plan. And so I originally got a calendar, went through the calendar, marked off, birthdays, holidays, trips that I really wanted to make sure I would be present for. So that way I could make those days lighter schedule days. And, I know which days I can really do heavier schedule or heavier studying. And so I went through and I organized my material by topic and then went through and assigned them per days. So that way, each day I had a set list of tasks for me to complete. And that was really grounding to know that I had an end goal and I was able to actually visualize saying, okay, this is a lot of information, but this is how I can break it up to actually make sure that it can be accomplished. And then as I went through my studying process, I got more and more comfortable and ended up deviating from the schedule by the end. But it really just helped me with getting a starting point.
Janice, I would love to hear from you next.
Yeah, Emily made a lot of great points. I can agree. I think I work well with a somewhat rigid schedule. However, I also know that I don't like very long study days. So especially working full time. So just being realistic, I didn't necessarily want to maybe give myself 3 or 4 hours after working. So I did have to expand my study time a bit more. So I believe I started in May, so that is about 4 months. And I know that is a very long time to say that's just going to be dedicated to studying, but that did allow me to take shorter times and not necessarily feel bad about it either. One thing that I can also say was similar to Emily is this go around, because this was not my first time taking the exam, but I did plan it every single day. And I think that helped me tremendously instead of maybe weekly, like I've done in the past. It just allowed me to know, even if I did miss a day, it was very easy to go back and see exactly what I had to catch up on, versus just putting everything in this weekly or bi-weekly time frame. And lastly, just when you are making your schedule, gathering as much information as you can, but to echo Emily again with making sure if there are certain holidays or events coming up, because we're not robots and you want to be able to have those moments where you can enjoy yourself in between all of the studying. So if you are able to put that into your schedule ahead of time, I think it makes so much of a difference.
Really appreciate that advice too. And that is so true, where we need to continue to live our lives despite having this extra workload of studying for the exam. So I'm glad you were able to integrate that into your schedule. Vedika, it'd be great to hear from you as well.
Of course. So yeah, Emily and Janice both raised very great points just regarding trying to start off just by building that schedule first and just really figuring out how you want to map out what your study plan looks like. And I know for me personally, what helped was actually figuring out when I wanted to take my test date. So I was able to look ahead at Prometric, just knowing I was going to be in New Orleans then, figure out when would be the latest available that I could offer. I personally was somebody who wanted to maximize as much study time as I could. So I set my exam date to the very end of August. And that allowed me to just backtrack, wanting to figure out having a 11-week study plan just to be able to put that in. And my idea was having 10 weeks with one review week where I'd be able to catch any concepts that I needed to look over again in case I missed anything. In terms of actually developing the study schedule, that was what I started just a few weeks after just giving time for myself, just recovering from grad school in May. And I was fortunate just in being able to, along with gathering resources from the Discord, I also unfortunately just with the alumni at Michigan's program that we have a drive that puts together a lot of resources just for studying for boards. So even just working with that, I was able to help with building my study schedule. And I know for me, it was a little more difficult to have a very rigid schedule where I knew every single day was going to do something, just because there was also a lot of other changes going on in my life where I was moving out of my apartment in Michigan. I was back home and then I was moving to a new city and then starting work at a new job. And because there were a lot of those changes going on in my life, I had to give myself a little bit more grace just in those periods. And it was really only when I was finally settled into my work that I was able to really just focus entirely on studying and not have those other things going on. But I think just in general, figuring out just how many weeks you want to spend to prepare for boards and even just planning week by week on major concepts that you want to cover. And then for me, I would spend my start of the week just figuring out, okay, for each day of this week, what do I want to try to study? And I went from there.
It's great. Many people who are taking this exam are in a period of transition, right? And that literally might mean, moving to a new city, to a new state, and it takes time to do that. And it's great that you were able to anticipate that and integrate that into your schedule. The next thing I'd like to ask is just if you could walk us through what would a study period look like for you, or like a study block? Did you set aside blocks of time? How long were these blocks of time? Was it an hour, 2 hours? And like, what exactly were you doing during that time? And I know it may vary sort of from topic to topic and from day to day, but I think it would be helpful for our audience just to hear like maybe an example of 1 or 2 days of what that specifically looked like when you actually sat down to study. So, Emily, we can start with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say my study schedule also really fluctuated whether or not it was in the beginning versus the end. For me, when I was organizing my time, the very front of my study blocks were more oriented and really understanding the material. And then more towards the tail end of closer to the exam, it was more memorization. But for instance, one of the really daunting topics for me was inborn errors of metabolisms and metabolics. And so, what I did to really try to tackle that was I spent like a week and a half, 2 weeks really studying that topic. And I would initially go through lectures and I would do as much as I could tolerate. I would do maybe 1 or 2 lectures a day. And then anything that was really hard for me to digest or something that was really hard for me to memorize, I actually always had note cards with me. And so I would write down that question or I would write down that enzyme or that gene so that I could look back on it at another time. And then towards the end, I would actually go through my flashcards and really try to memorize. One thing I do want to point out is that I was not a working genetic counselor over the summer. And so this is in a very like ideal study time sessions, so I had entire days in which I could really figure out how to like block out that time. And for me, it was beneficial to kind of take some of that extra time looking back. Some topics, I was like, I spent too much time on it and I could have really done more efficient studying or more targeted studying. But I learned that a lot too as I was going through my plan.
I think I took a similar approach. I really like the variety. So in the beginning, maybe why it is so important to get all of your resources is because you'll know where to go essentially. So for example, maybe if I'm looking at a condition, I'll do gene reviews for maybe about 30 minutes, but then I will try to find a practice test that incorporates those same type of questions and maybe do that for another 30 minutes. So just essentially trying to get as much of what I could from the different type of resources that were there. So instead of just looking at one source, a little bit from everything to build upon it. Um, I think that just allowed me in my brain, even though I was studying, because I was switching it up, it felt like I was doing something different. So it was just a good way to keep me studying longer. And even maybe on the days where you don't have as much energy, but you still want to make sure you're doing something, a light just flashcard review or anything just to make sure that at least you have the time and it's still sticking to your brain. So those are some of the things that helped me.
So I'd say that in terms of my study plan, similar to Emily, the beginning part of my study plan definitely focused a lot more on broader concepts. And then towards the end, it was a lot more focused on memorization, particularly for certain conditions. I know for me personally, inborn errors of metabolism and metabolics was also a topic that I found myself struggling with and felt like I had to review again and again and again. Uh, but I know for me, before I started working, I was fortunate to have just had full days where I was able to give myself a good 3, 4 hours just to focus on studying. And usually for that, I know I'm personally a reading and writing sort of learner. So for me, it would be a matter of going through the material and just trying to rewrite it for myself just to try to get it to stick in my head and being able to review that way. Um, I know as I was in the middle of moving, I was also actually trying to just listen to a bunch of different podcasts, um, just to try to at least have something get in my head, just in terms of internalizing that information, since I know for me, I had to drive a good 15 hours and didn't really have any other way of just using the time anyway. So that was helpful. And then I know I would also usually spend time during the weekends just trying to go through practice questions and trying to reflect on those practice questions. For any ones that I do get right, is it because I knew the answer, or was it because I was guessing, or even for the ones that I got wrong, just understanding what makes this, what made the answer the correct answer, and trying to rationalize that. Additionally, I think what also was really helpful was, as I was more focused on memorizing conditions towards the end of my studying, was just writing out note cards and being able to work with that and review, again, just because of how I learn best.
That's great. And you know, one question that actually that came to mind was in terms of how you were studying, say, like kind of the conditions versus the more like psychosocial, legal ethics. How did that differ?
I can start off. I would say that actually the study rare videos that went through the questions and the lectures, that was really, really helpful to me. And all three of us were actually in the same study group placed in by study rare, which was fantastic. And so for me, it was really helpful. We each week we would meet and we would have a set of questions, and we spent a really big chunk of time doing ethics and psychosocial. And so if I got a question wrong or someone in the group got a question wrong, we would really kind of talk it through and say, okay, what's the logic here with the question versus what my thought process is, and how to answer it going forward. So I found specifically for psychosocial questions, it was actually best for me to do practice questions, and then again, just speaking with other people in the group. The group was fantastic. Cannot say enough great things, and it was really helpful.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that a bit, Daniel, when you mentioned that there are different techniques for different concepts, 100% agree with that. I do think that maybe talking through some of the psychosocial and the ethics is a really helpful tip. You just get to conceptualize it a lot. And if you do have any questions, it's a good way to maybe see how someone else thinks about it, because a lot of times when it's just maybe that one thing that maybe if you thought about it in just a little bit of a different perspective, then it's like, oh, okay, I understand it a lot better now. The Green Book, I know everybody is always talking about that, but even just getting definitions directly from the Green Book and trying your best to use real life examples as well. Um, I feel like those were some of the better ways to study for the psychosocial and ethics versus maybe flashcards or gene reviews for some of the other concepts.
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree with all the above. I know definitely it's a matter of just talking out some of the questions, like going through practice questions is very helpful just for the psychosocial content and the ethics and legal content that's reflected on the exam. I also, and I was fortunate to have been part of one study group through study where I was also in another study group as well. And in that group, we were actually making up our own questions. And every week we meet to try to go through those questions with it as a group and troubleshoot from there. So we focused on different topics week by week, but there was one week where we did make it more psychosocial. And there was one week that we had more focused on finances reimbursement. And I'd say those were also helpful just in terms of coming up with your own questions, just to help think on how these sorts of questions can be asked. And I think echoing Janice, I know I also went through the Green Book, and that was also a case where I didn't rely as much on flashcards. But I was still taking notes just from the chapters of the Green Book, just so when I had to go back and review anything, I at least just had a smaller set of notes to go through as opposed to having to go through the entire book again.
One common thread I heard from all three responses was essentially the idea of active learning, whether it's discussing concepts with other folks or creating new resources, like creating questions. That is the idea behind actively learning versus just passively listening, passively reading. It can be harder to sort of retain and learn information that way. So I'm really glad to hear that you all were using some of those strategies. I wanted also to ask, how did your study plan change, if it did at all, over time? Like maybe you were studying with a study group at some point, but you weren't initially. And so maybe you had one plan and maybe it changed.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a great point. Like I said, in the beginning of my study plan, it was really just helpful for me to be able to tangibly see, how I can get to the finish line of the test while studying all content. But when I was actually going through my study plan, I would say about maybe a little bit more than halfway, I ended up really kind of deviating from that plan and just going more with my gut instincts of saying, okay, well, these are the practice questions that are a lot harder than I thought. These are questions that are a lot easier than I thought. And so, really just modifying what my strengths and weaknesses were. And so, I think it just depends on, again, just kind of going through that plan. And also, we're human. There are some days that I did not check off everything in all my boxes that I had that day, but being able to pivot and modify and knowing, okay, well, this day wasn't super productive, but sometimes we need those unproductive days just to rest or recuperate or, just be with loved ones or, friends, etc., whatever you enjoy doing. And so that's kind of how I went about it.
When I went in, I essentially had the idea that I knew things would change a bit. And I don't know if this was maybe I just didn't know what to put into these days, but towards the end, the last 3 weeks, I believe, I just kept blank until I got closer. So, of course, I knew that was going to be more intense study time. I definitely wanted to increase the amount of time I was studying daily. Um, but just knowing, okay, as I get closer, I can see is do I feel comfortable with versus what do I need to study a bit more? So I think that actually worked really nicely for me. It just allowed me to really focus, spend the last few weeks again focusing on what I really needed to. But one concept of having everything daily, I think it just allowed me to easily know what I did miss. So if, again, for some reason it wasn't the best study day, because everything was already scheduled out so nicely, I could easily go back and say, okay, let me just rearrange my days a bit, but make sure that I still hit those same topics at some point during the week.
I think for me, I already knew going in that there was just going to have to be a lot of flexibility in terms of how I was studying, just because of moving and starting a job and adjusting to a new job. I would say that for me, one thing which I did underestimate was just how much time I was going to have to spend reviewing certain things again and again. And I know that I did build myself when I initially created my study plan at having that 1 week of just being able to review things. And that was definitely helpful to have. But there were some weeks where I realized, oh, I actually do need a little bit more time to make sure I understood this concept because it didn't quite stick the first time that I was going through it. So I would say that was something which towards the end I realized that, okay, I need to accommodate some more time for studying things like inborn errors of metabolism, or even when studying teratogens, realizing I needed a little bit more time just to be able to get those concepts to stick. But then as I kept going through my plan, I also realized there were some things that I had planned for that I realized I didn't need to spend as much time on. And I was also fortunate, just even when I was starting out at my job, that I was given a lot of time just to study while I was there. And that's definitely something that was very beneficial for me to have, just having that extra time, even while I was working, to just be able to study. So then it wasn't as if I had to spend so many extra hours at home after work studying too and completely burn myself out. So I know that is one piece of advice I would say, that if you are studying while in the process of starting a new job, is talking with your supervisor about that, just being able to advocate for what you need just to be able to succeed for this exam, because more than that, they're also invested in you passing this boards. So that's one thing for sure that I'd recommend.
I think that's great advice. I've heard a number of folks successfully do that and definitely just encourage anybody who's currently working, say like, hey, can I have some time to study during the workday? That's a totally reasonable ask. I wanted to also ask, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of creating your study plan, or do you feel generally okay with how the process went?
I would say that the way that I would change my study plan isn't actually necessarily the plan, but kind of the pressure that I put on myself. studying for the boards is no easy feat. And I think there was some added pressure in my mind just because I was not currently a working genetic counselor. And so saying, like, okay, I have these full days, I need to make sure that I, completely do these full days of studying. But, looking back, I am happy I did take the breaks that I did in order to enjoy my summer, be with family, be with friends, and just kind of take the break since graduating. And so I would say just kind of like the positive self-talk of saying, okay, no matter what the outcome is going to be okay. And just positive self-talk of, you are doing what you're supposed to do with your study plans, with applying to jobs, and just positive self-talk. I really cannot emphasize it enough.
I feel very happy with my study plan. I may have maybe been more intentional about incorporating breaks. So I took breaks, but it was almost because I felt like I just couldn't do it that day. So forcefully taking a break versus maybe actually putting in my schedule, like, okay, today is Friday. When you get off of work, do something that brings you joy instead of immediately starting to study. So definitely echo just how much pressure you can kind of put on yourself when you do that. Um, so yes, I think it is important to just be realistic when you are making your study schedule. Again, I started 4 months in advance, so is that realistic to say that you're gonna study every single day for 4 months? No, and you don't want to push yourself to the limit where the only thing you can do is essentially take a break. Just try to take the breaks ahead of time or a plan for the breaks ahead of time.
Yeah, 100% agree with all of that. Sometimes taking a break can be as productive as studying, and you need that just to be able to, not only for yourself mentally, but then also even just to help with retaining the information that you have studied and just giving yourself space. And I also have to agree 100% with what Emily said. I think the one thing I'd probably change in my study plan overall was perhaps incorporating 2 weeks that I was just reviewing things as opposed to just the 1 week that I'd built in. I think I certainly could have benefited from that, especially as I realized how much I felt like I was going back and reviewing things as I was still trying to study additional things that I hadn't covered yet. The other thing is really just that pressure. I also felt like I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to pass, and I think that pressure felt a lot heavier as someone who had scheduled my exam for the very end of the month, and just hearing other people in my class that had taken the exam and passed, hearing other people around me that had taken it and passed, I definitely felt like I was putting a lot more on myself mentally than I really needed to. And I know even just the day of, what really helped me was just talking with someone about it and just having people that helped hype me up and just help me believe in myself that I could do it, and really just having that positive self-talk that you can do it, you're putting in the work, you're doing what you need to do. So really just believing in yourself.
I really appreciate all of those insights. And final question, any advice that you all would give to folks who are going to be taking the exam, say in February or next August? Really just anything that kind of give them a head start on their process of creating a study plan.
Yeah, I say about two different points that I'd like to bring up. One is just knowing yourself and what you need in order to be successful. As you see, there are three of us. We all had very different study plans, but ultimately we were successful. And, it's so each person is different. It's not a one size fits all studying plan. And so it's just trying to figure out what works best for you and what your needs are. And my second piece of advice I would say is to join that study group that Study Rare offers to put you in. I was never a huge group studier, but just being in that supportive environment with my study mates was just fantastic. It really helped to say, like, okay, I'm not alone in this pressure that I feel. I'm not alone in this overwhelming feeling of studying. And there's other people that are doing this alongside me. And kind of just having your own cheerleading section was also really wonderful. I can't say enough great things about my group mates. And yeah, so also good luck to everyone. You got this.
I feel the biggest piece of advice I have right now is just that everyone is different. So, for example, um, maybe traditional things don't necessarily work for you. I know everyone always mentions how important it is to read the Green Book front and back. I just felt like I didn't have the time to do that once I was given that advice. So one resource that I used was Speechify. And so you can download it and it just reads the book out loud for you. So an audiobook at that point. I even took it as far as putting some of my notes in there. So so I can hear it throughout the day, maybe subconsciously getting into my brain a little bit. And so I know that's not something that will work for everybody, but if you are open to maybe doing things that are not so straightforward, that was something I felt really helped me just in my process.
Yeah, I think just to echo what everyone says, everyone is different. Everybody does have different learning styles. So really just recognizing what you know works best for you. You already had to put in the work just for studying to get through grad school. So you already have a sense of just what you know best, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and really using that just to figure out how you want to start studying and figuring out that plan. I think it also is important just to think about just different ways in which you learn. Like I'm personally someone who learns really well just by reading and writing things out for myself. Some other people who are more visual or auditory learners, you can benefit from watching different videos, just explaining certain genetic conditions or certain genetic concepts, or listening to podcasts. I know for me, like I said earlier, when I was in the middle of moving, what helped me just in terms of still feeling like I was studying and doing something was one podcast I was listening to on Spotify. It's called You're Kidding, Right? And it's two pediatric doctors based in Australia, but some of the episodes that they do highlight talk about certain genetic conditions and the etiology and management for that. So that was really helpful in just internalizing some of the information for some of those more common conditions that you are expected to know more about. And yeah, I really just think that having community can also be very empowering. So being part of study groups is helpful not only just in terms of just holding yourself accountable on topics you want to cover, but also just recognizing that you're not alone in going through this and studying and struggling to go through boards. So I know that was definitely very helpful just for me in terms of feeling like I didn't feel like it was just me that was under all this pressure, and also just helping and knowing that, okay, there are other people around me that also believe in me and believe in doing this. And that support meant everything.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that that was the case, and I'm so glad to hear that you all found each other through the StudyWare groups. And I know that we helped place the groups, but it's you all who took the next step and really made it your own and were ultimately successful, which we can't ask for anything more. So I just want to thank you all today for joining us, for speaking with us, sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it. And again, congratulations. So happy for you all and wishing you all the best on your next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.